They said I was a traitor. They didn't say it softly, or quietly, or behind closed doors. They shouted it in the square, wrote it in chalk on the church wall, whispered it into their children's ears like a bedtime prayer. She laid with a savage. They hissed, and that was all it took. No trial, no preacher's prayer, no chance to explain. I stood on splintered wood with my wrists bound and my mouth swollen shut. I couldn't speak even if they had let me. The rope scraped against the skin of my throat like a cruel finger tracing guilt that didn't belong to me. I wanted to scream that I didn't betray them, that I never belonged to them in the first place. But my voice had been taken from me long before the rope had. The church bell tolled. I remember thinking how odd it sounded, ringing not for a sermon, not for a wedding, but for my death. Children stood beside their mothers, their faces pale and curious. Old women clutched their shawls and muttered scripture. One of them spat toward my feet. "Let her swing," she said, as if I were a broken signpost or a wind chime that had outlived its melody. I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of being misunderstood, of dying without the truth ever having its moment to breathe. Because I hadn't seduced anyone. I hadn't plotted to betray the town. I had fallen in love. Quietly, tenderly, in the shadows of barns and the hush of cottonwoods swaying. I loved a man named Tahu, who spoke little but listened deeply, who gave more than he ever took, who found me one night after my stepbrother's rage had left welts on my legs and shame in my eyes. He offered me water and silence, and somehow, in that silence, I began to heal. But the town didn't care about healing. They cared about bloodlines, borders, the color of skin and the shape of language. They didn't care that Tahu never once asked me for anything I wasn't willing to give. That he carved me a ring from bone and called me his in a way no man from town ever dared. That we met not because we were hiding, but because the world wouldn't let us be seen. They didn't care that when he disappeared after the raid, I cried every night into a pillow I couldn't admit was his. That I held onto the bone ring like it was a heartbeat. That I only stopped waiting for him the day my stepbrother found it under my mattress and dragged me by the hair into the sheriff's office. That's when the whispers started. The word savage came first, then traitor, then whore. I tried to deny it. At first, I swore the ring was just a token, a trinket. I said nothing happened, but they saw the truth in my silence. And maybe that was what damned me. The sheriff didn't even ask questions. He just nodded like someone checking a box. "String her up," he said, and that was it. That morning, they let me wash my face. Gave me a dress that used to be white. They wanted a spectacle, not a murder, a lesson, not a killing. They wanted to show the other girls what happens when love crosses the line they drew in the sand generations ago. They marched me through the square like a thief. But I hadn't stolen anything. Except, perhaps, a future that didn't belong to them. I searched the crowd for a familiar face. For someone to cry, to shout, to say, "Wait, she's one of us." But no one did, not even the preacher. His eyes were cold, his hands folded, his mouth a sealed tomb of cowardice. They tied my hands above my head, and I remember how the rope bit into the raw skin on my wrist. My arms shook, but I didn't cry, not because I was brave, but because I had nothing left to give them. Not my tears, not my voice. I kept looking at the horizon, not for salvation, not for mercy, but for him. They told me Tahu had vanished, that he'd fled with the others, that he never looked back, that maybe he never loved me at all. And part of me believed them. Part of me hated him for not coming back, for leaving me here to rot for a love that only I seemed to carry. But the other part of me knew the truth, knew that love like his didn't just disappear, knew that if he was gone, it wasn't by choice. Still, I stood alone. The air was dry, my lips cracked, my heart pounded louder than the crowd. And still, no one asked me why. No one asked what I felt. They only asked how high the gallows needed to be. I wasn't a traitor. I wasn't a whore. I was a girl who found peace in the arms of someone the world had deemed unworthy. And for that, they wanted to kill me. When the sheriff nodded, the world tilted, my knees buckled, the rope pulled taut, and just before the darkness swallowed me, I thought, not of fear, or of pain, but of his hands, offering me water in the night, his voice, whispering my name like a prayer, his silence, holding me like something sacred. They said I was a traitor. But all I ever did was love. The moment before death is supposed to be quiet, some say peaceful. Mine was not. The world was loud. Boots shuffled across dry dirt. The sheriff's voice rang out, flat and final. The crowd murmured like a hive, buzzing with tension, judgment, and something else, anticipation. I could feel it in my bones. They were waiting for me to fall. I dangled there, wrists bound above me, feet barely touching the wooden platform. The rope was already burning into my throat, not yet tight enough to choke, but enough to remind me it would happen soon. I wasn't dead yet, but I was close enough to feel its breath. I wanted to scream, not from fear, but from the injustice, the betrayal. I had never been given a chance to explain. My body hurt, my mouth was swollen from the beating. My ribs ached with every breath. The dusty wind scratched my skin. But none of that stung as much as the silence of the people watching. They didn't speak for me. Not one. I saw their faces, my neighbors. The preacher's wife. The blacksmith's daughter who once clutched my skirt during a storm. They looked away now, or worse, they stared straight at me. Their eyes dry, their mouths hard. No one cried, no one flinched, not even when the sheriff raised his hand to give the final signal. And I stopped looking at them. I turned my gaze to the hills, the horizon, the sky above the rooftops, searching, not for hope, but for a memory, a shadow, a man. Tahu. They told me he had run, that he had vanished after the raid like a ghost, that he was one of them, Apache. They spat, like that explained everything. I had tried to believe he'd abandoned me, that he was gone like they said. It was easier to accept that than to imagine him suffering somewhere worse. But my heart, traitorous, loyal heart, had kept listening, waiting. Still, as the rope tightened, I let go. I let go of hope, of anger, of the ache in my chest. I closed my eyes, let them call me what they would. And then it happened. A sound, louder than any voice, sharper than any prayer, rushed into the square. Hooves, thunder on dirt, a gallop cutting through the air like a warning. The crowd turned, gasps flew like sparks. Someone shouted, the sheriff barked an order. But it was lost in the stampede of shock. I opened my eyes, and there he was, riding hard through the mob. Dust swirling behind him like a storm. Came a man painted in the old ways, bone-white stripes across his chest. Dark paint streaking his jaw, his eyes blazing. He was not armed with guns, but with something older, sacred, a bundle of sage, wrapped tight in cloth, its tip smoldering. Tahu. My heart, which had grown so still, beat again, not gently, not with relief, but like it had been struck by lightning. He didn't yell, didn't brandish threats. He slid from the horse with the grace of a predator and moved through the stunned crowd like they were shadows. His eyes never left mine. He raised the smoking sage to the sky, then to the noose above me. The flame licked the rope's fibers. And then, miracle or mercy, the strands curled away from the heat. And the knot unraveled. I collapsed, but I didn't hit the ground. Strong arms caught me, one beneath my knees, one around my back. The scent of ash and cedar clung to his skin. I looked up into his face, and despite the war paint and the years carved into his jaw, I saw him, my Tahu, the boy who had once given me water behind a barn, the man who never asked for anything but gave me everything. The town stared in disbelief. Their mouths hung open. Some murmured about magic, others about curses. A few reached for weapons. The sheriff drew his revolver. Put her down, he commanded, or you die where you stand. Tahu didn't move, didn't tremble. He spoke, his voice low, but unyielding. She is not your prisoner. She is not your shame. She is mine now. My breath caught in my chest. I wanted to say his name, to ask if he was real. But my voice cracked like the rope had stolen more than air, it had stolen time. He knelt, laid me down gently on the earth, and pressed his fingers to my temples, my collarbone, the bruise on my cheek. Not like a show, not for them, for me. His touch was steady, sure, as if calling something lost back into place. The crowd was frozen, but I was thawing. I gasped, a broken sound, but it was breath. It was life. I looked up, and I saw the sky for the first time, not through tears, but through light. You came, I whispered, the words gravel in my throat. You called, he said, no smile, just truth. A little girl stepped forward. One of the few faces that didn't look like stone. Miss Willa gave me this, she said, holding up a scrap of cloth. Said it was for courage. Her father pulled her back, but the crack had already formed. Tahu looked around, not with hatred, but with knowing. I did not come for war, he said, but if you raise your weapons, I will end it. No one moved, and just like that, he lifted me again, slow, careful. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of fear, not of his strength, but of what he represented. A man who came back, a woman they failed to break. I buried my face against his neck. My body still hurt, my limbs still shook, but in that moment, wrapped in his arms, I felt more alive than I ever had. Behind us, the tree I'd been hung from swayed gently in the wind. The rope, burned and broken, danced like it, too, had been freed. We rode into the dusk, toward the hills, toward a new chapter not promised, but taken, together. And as the town faded behind us, I realized something. I had not died. I had been born again, in love, in fire, in defiance. They didn't just leave the town, they left the world that tried to bury them. Tahu never said, we're free now. Freedom wasn't something he needed to announce. It was in the way he led the horse off the main path. Into the wild, into silence. It was in the way Willa let her arms wrap tighter around his waist. Not from fear, but from purpose. Her body still hurt. The rope burns on her neck. The bruises beneath her ribs. The tremble in her legs. But something inside her had gone quiet, not defeated, but focused. The world she knew, the one that had condemned her, was gone. She would not mourn it. She would replace it. They reached the ridge after sunset. The cottonwoods bowed in the wind. The air cooler, cleaner. Stars hung low like witnesses. Tahu stopped beside a fire ring that had not seen flame in many seasons. She recognized the place, a clearing they had once shared as children, back when dreams felt dangerous. This is where we start, he said. Not hide, not rest, start. Willa slid off the horse. Her legs buckled slightly, but she didn't ask for help. She pressed her hand to a tree and stood tall. Her torn dress clung to her. Her lips were cracked, but in her eyes, there was fire again. The cabin they found was barely a skeleton, 4 posts, a collapsed roof, and walls that whispered of storms long past. Perfect, she thought, not because it was safe, but because it was empty of memory. She didn't want to live among someone else's ghosts. She wanted to build her own. They cleared it together, stone by stone, board by rotted board. Tahu used his blade to strip vines from the beams while Willa dragged debris into piles. Fingers bloodied and raw, she didn't wince. The pain was truthful, not like the pain the town had given her. This pain meant something. It created. At night, they slept beside the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket. Tahu carved wood by the flames. Willa wrote. At first, she didn't know what she was writing, only that she had to. Her hands shook, but her mind was steady. She began with the rope, with the silence of the preacher, with the way the sheriff's eyes never once looked sorry, with the burn on her throat that had stolen her voice, and the man who gave it back. She didn't write to remember. She wrote to reclaim. Word by word, she pulled herself out of their narrative and into her own. She wrote by firelight while Tahu showed her how to mend snares, build rain catchers, track deer, and tell the difference between healing roots and poison. She learned to split wood clean, to strip bark without waste, to gather herbs that smelled of memory and strength. Each day, her muscles grew tighter, her scars faded, but she never covered them. They weren't shame, they were evidence. That she had been hung and did not die. That she had been called traitor and walked away unowned. One morning, Tahu brought her a rabbit. She didn't wait for him to prepare it. She took the knife and did it herself. Not cleanly, not skillfully, but with purpose. He watched in silence, then nodded, not with pride, but with recognition. They rebuilt the cabin, plank by plank. She climbed to the roof without asking and helped him hammer cedar bark into place. They didn't talk much, but their silence wasn't empty. It was full of knowing. One night, when the roof was nearly done, she stood outside and stared at the clearing. Wind lifted her hair. The moon cast light on the ridge. She could still hear the echo of voices from her past, the preacher's judgment, her father's silence, the rustle of skirts turning away. She didn't cry. Instead, she picked up a stone and threw it hard into the fire pit. "I'm not yours anymore," she whispered. Not to the wind, not to God, to herself. Inside the cabin, she pressed her palms to the wall they had just finished. This wasn't a hiding place. This was a fortress, not to keep the world out, but to remind herself she had survived it. Tahu handed her a carved wooden bird the next morning. "It's you," he said. "What kind?" "One that doesn't migrate anymore. One that stays." She smiled, not because it was sweet, but because it was true. They planted seeds, corn, beans, herbs. Willa didn't ask if they would grow. She didn't need promises. She only needed the act of trying. Every pressed seed was a line in the story she was writing with her body. Her breath, her blood. Some nights, she still woke sweating, her fingers reaching for her throat. But each time, Tahu was there, not holding her, but near, close enough for her to know she wasn't alone, that she'd never have to beg for protection again. She wrote each morning now. On folded parchment she tucked inside a wooden box near the fire. Not prayers, not memories, declarations. I was the woman they tried to erase. I am the woman who built this place from nothing. I am not waiting to be forgiven. I am not asking to be believed. I exist. That is enough. Sometimes she read them aloud to the trees, just to hear her voice again. When the rains came, the roof held. When the first sprouts broke the earth, she laughed so loud it scared the birds. When she bled one morning and didn't weep, but simply wiped her thighs and went back to digging, she knew she'd buried something else, her fear. And when a girl appeared at the edge of their garden weeks later, barefoot and hollow-eyed, Willa didn't hesitate. She offered her food, shelter, a place at the fire. The girl asked, "What do you do out here?" Willa replied, "We build what they tried to burn." She never asked Tahu for permission. She never needed to. They were equal architects of a new world. At night, they sat beside the fire while the wind whispered through the trees. Tahu braided rope. Willa traced the scars on her wrists like they were maps. Not to where she had been, but to where she was going. By the time the girl arrived, the cabin stood strong, and Willa no longer looked over her shoulder when the wind changed. She was planting sage when she heard soft steps in the grass. Not the sharp, purposeful stride of a threat. No. This was something else, something hesitant. Willa didn't rise. She just waited, and eventually, from behind the birch trees near the edge of the clearing, a girl stepped out. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her dress was torn, her cheeks hollow, hair tangled at the shoulders. Barefoot, no sound but breath. "You the witch?" the girl asked. Willa looked up, sunlight in her eyes. "What did they tell you?" The girl swallowed hard. "They said a white woman lived here, with a savage. That she grows ghost seeds and sings to the fire." Willa smiled, genuinely, not mockery. "I suppose I do." The girl didn't run. She stepped forward. "I'm hungry." Willa stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and held out her hand. "Then come eat." Lisa. That was her name, though it took a week for her to say it aloud. Like the word had to thaw before it could exist again. She didn't cry, not once, but Willa recognized the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her eyes flinched at sudden movement, the silence that lingered even after someone spoke. It was the silence Willa once wore like armor. So she didn't force comfort. She offered tools instead, a place to sit, a warm bowl of stew. And when Lisa asked questions, Willa answered plainly. When Lisa asked if the town really tried to hang her, Willa said yes. When she asked why, Willa replied, "Because I loved someone they feared more than they feared their own hatred." Lisa didn't ask what happened after that. She didn't need to. The cabin stood. The fire crackled. The crops grew. The truth, like Willa herself, was still standing. Soon Lisa began to help, gathering wood, fetching water, watching as Willa patched blankets and dried herbs. But she also began to listen, not just with ears, but with hunger for something beyond survival. One night, Lisa held up a sheet of parchment. "You write a lot," she said. "I write what no one else will." Willa answered. "Like, what really happened?" Willa nodded. "What they were too afraid to say out loud." Lisa studied her for a long moment. Can you teach me how to do that? Willa smiled, small, but certain. Yes, but not just how to write, how to remember, and how to tell it loud enough that no one can bury it again. The stories Willa wrote didn't soften with time. She didn't romanticize the rope, or the faces in the crowd who said nothing. She didn't hide the bruises or the way her hands shook when she first struck flint in the mountains. But she refused to be a victim on the page. She wrote herself as someone who broke the noose and built a fire. Someone who turned scars into maps. And now, with Lisa watching, she rewrote the rules. Word of Willa had spread like wind through dry grass. Whispers turned into warnings, and warnings turned into tales. Some called her cursed, others said she was blessed. Some said she had risen from the dead. A few claimed she summoned animals and cast spells on the harvest. Willa didn't argue. Let them say what they wanted, because while they whispered, she was building. Lisa asked her once, "Why don't you go back and show them you're still alive?" Willa shook her head. That's not the lesson. Then what is? That survival isn't about being seen. It's about choosing how you live. Lisa grew stronger. Her cheeks rounded out. Her eyes held fire instead of fog. She laughed sometimes, short, surprised bursts. She braided Willa's hair with wildflowers. She learned how to tie snares and shape arrows under Tahu's guidance. And under Willa's, she learned how to speak again. Not just in words, but in truth. One afternoon, while washing potatoes, Lisa said, almost casually, "I think I want to write something too." "About what?" Willa asked. Lisa shrugged. "My father. What happened after he drank too much. What my mother used to hide. The things no one believed me about." Willa didn't speak right away. She simply placed a smooth, flat stone into Lisa's hand. "Then write it here first," she said. "Let the stone hear it before the world does." Lisa wasn't the last. Others came. Quiet families from the North Ridge. A boy with a scar down his cheek. A woman with 2 children and nowhere to go. Willa never turned them away. She didn't promise them safety. She offered truth. She offered fire. She offered the chance to stop hiding. One evening, after a long day of tending crops and mending clothing, Willa sat beside the fire with Lisa and Tahu. The girl asked, "Will they always think you're the woman who betrayed them?" Willa stared into the flames. "Maybe," she said, "but they'll also say I survived the rope. That I wrote stories. That people came to me. That I taught a girl how to speak." Lisa tilted her head. "And what will I be?" Willa turned to her, eyes fierce and bright. "The girl who stopped being silent." Lisa grinned. They never posted signs. They never built fences. But somehow, a community formed, quiet and strong like trees growing underground. They didn't preach forgiveness. They planted resilience. They wrote and told and healed. And when Lisa finally read her story aloud by the fire, voice trembling but steady, Willa didn't cry. She stood up and clapped. Because this was the future they weren't supposed to have. Because now, the echo of her survival had become someone else's first breath. And because no matter what the town said, no matter how loud the lies, they could not silence the truth once it had been planted. Spoken, and passed on. The letter arrived without warning. No name, no return address, just a folded sheet of parchment, brittle at the corners, the ink dry like an old wound. Willa found it lying on the table inside the cabin, as if the wind had carried it through the trees, as if the past could still find its way into places it no longer belonged. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Still, she did. And inside, just one sentence. She should have died. The town mourned when she didn't. No signature. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Pastor Elgin, the same man who'd once quoted scripture as she stood on the gallows. Bruised, bleeding, bound. The same man who'd told her father, "Let her be an example." The same man who'd blessed the noose in God's name. For a long moment, she didn't move. The fire crackled behind her. Outside, the wind carried the smell of cedar and wild sage. Lisa laughed somewhere beyond the ridge, her voice lighter these days. Stronger. Willa looked down at the letter. She felt nothing. No rage, no sorrow, no fear, just resolve. She stepped outside, boots crunching against stone, and walked to the tree. The same tree they'd once tried to hang her from. The one Tahu had marked with ash after he cut her down. The one whose rope scar still wrapped around its trunk like a failed curse. Willa knelt. She placed the letter on a flat rock, anchoring its edges with 2 carved bone beads. Then she reached into the small pouch at her hip, pulled out a twig from the cottonwood grove, dried and hollow. She whispered not a prayer, but a sentence of her own. You don't own my ending. Then she lit the twig and touched the flame to the paper. The fire took quickly. It curled the words into smoke, black tendrils twisting into the sky, until nothing remained but embers and dust. And with that, she closed the door to the past, without needing it to close on her. That evening, she sat by the fire. A new journal opened across her knees. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. She wasn't writing pain anymore. She was writing legacy, not just what had been done to her, but what she'd done after. She wrote of the cabin, of Lisa's first laugh, of the seeds planted in a garden they once doubted would grow, of the way Tahu hummed softly when he carved, and how the firelight danced on the walls like the spirits of stories not yet told. When Lisa asked what she was writing now, Willa said, the parts they never thought I'd live long enough to tell. Lisa smiled. What's it called? Willa looked up, her voice steady. The woman who was hung for love. Spring came like a promise. The garden bloomed, green pushing through dark soil. The sky turned gentler, and the wind no longer whispered of ghosts. Word spread, always in whispers, that the woman from the hanging had lived. Some said she cursed the land. Others said she healed it. A few even dared to believe she might be real. But none dared say her name. And that suited her just fine. Names were tools, and she had already forged her own. By midsummer, others had come. Not many, just enough to matter. A woman with tired eyes and 5 children. A man who carried nothing but a bag of seeds and an old scar across his back. No one asked questions when they arrived. Willa didn't need their stories. She only asked, "Are you ready to begin again?" And when they nodded, she handed them a tool, a place by the fire, and a piece of land to tend. That was all she owed them. The chance she'd once been denied. One morning, Lisa brought her a pouch filled with herbs and said, "You taught me how to survive. But I want to learn how to teach others now." Willa didn't smile. She nodded. "You're not the student anymore. You're the spark." That night, Willa carved a new symbol into the cabin wall. Not a cross, not a name, but a circle made of fire and root. She told Lisa, "This means what we build will outlast what tried to destroy us." And then, when no one expected it, the preacher's widow came, alone. Gray hair, wrinkled hands, eyes that carried storms. She did not speak of the town. She simply stood at the edge of the clearing and said, "I remember your eyes, when they pulled the rope." Willa didn't offer warmth, only honesty. "I remember yours, too." They looked away. The woman lowered her gaze. "Do you want me to leave?" Willa looked at her for a long moment, then said, "That's not for me to answer. But if you stay, you build." And so the woman picked up a hammer. Years later, people still came, sometimes only for a night, sometimes forever. They came not for shelter, but for permission to begin, to unlearn, to break the shackles of the names others had given them. And Willa gave it, not by speaking, but by living. She became a myth that breathed, not because she disappeared, but because she stayed, because she chose to be seen on her own terms. When the first frost of autumn dusted the garden, Willa stood beside the same tree, now taller, thicker, its rope scar faded by bark and time. Lisa stood beside her, grown now, stronger. "What do we do if they come again?" she asked. Willa didn't look away. "Then they'll see what they failed to bury." She pressed a seed into the earth, soft, rich, fertile. Her hands were weathered, her voice clear. "I write my own ending now.